Hi, and welcome to the Luminaries In and Out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. In today's episode on the Pisces Moon as the luminary out of Sect, I speak with the one and only Claire Moon. We talked about the placement of her moon in the second whole sign house, but we also talk about many other things, such as how the mutable quadruplicity relates to dance and creativity, the emotional gifts and challenges that come in having the moon in such an expansive, changeable sign as Pisces, science and skepticism, science and spirituality, vipassana meditation, astrology as a caretaking profession, Venus in her own decan in Aquarius, the myth of Aphrodite, Eros, and the Typhon, and what Sphere and Sundry materia we put on before our conversation. In case you missed it, I recently launched a website for the podcast. There you can find information on all the episodes, as well as contribute to the podcast's sustainability by becoming a supporting member or offering a one-time donation. The website also has information on my services. I'm offering natal and horary consultations on a donation basis, as well as transcription, captioning, and audio editing. Thank you so much to the folks who have already supported the podcast. It really helps. Now for my conversation with Claire. I hope you enjoy it. Please be sure to check out the links to her website and socials below, as well as links to some of the resources that we touch on in our conversation. Claire Moon, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Have you been feeling Mercury's ingress into your first house at all, or how has the astrology been affecting you as of late?
I actually have noticed that, which, I mean, to be honest, I'm not always maybe paying attention to my own chart like I should be. And so things, happen and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's been in there for a whole week. But I was watching Mercury go in there and, I have a lot of stuff going on in my life right now, but I was being super rational and analytical and like maybe less emotional, which we'll talk about later because Pisces, but a little less emotional than I might be otherwise. And I was like, thank fluff for that. Like, thank fluff for Mercury in Aquarius.
I hear you. I was kind of hyper aware of Mercury moving into Aquarius because Mercury is my perfected Time Lord this year.
Okay.
And so I had like my solar return and my Mercury return on the same day in December. And then I've just been dealing with like retrograde Mercury in Capricorn. Mm-hmm. And so I was happy for Mercury to like move into a sign where it has like some triplicity dignity, like different things are being brought up. There's a different flavor. And so I felt it pretty palpably as well.
Would you say it was an improvement?
I feel like it was an improvement. I mean, I had some stuff come up the week before my birthday where like my whole job got reconfigured. And so it felt very much like a precursor to Mercury retrograde in my second, where like just my whole kind of work financial life is turned upside down. So yeah, I'm happy to be moving on from that and putting the focus hopefully on somewhere else and like now doing the work of integrating the changes that came with Mercury retrograde in the second.
Yeah, that's a lot. I hope that goes well. I was listening to some of the older episodes of this earlier this week and trying to catch up. Awesome episodes, by the way. And I remember hearing you say something about the job reconfig. So I hope that goes well for you.
Yeah, I think it's like the way that I kind of look at things is that all change has the opportunity for being good change.
Totally.
Even if it can kind of suck in the moment. But yeah, I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so why don't you offer just an introduction to yourself, short, long, however much time you want to take. And I'd also love to hear about if you have a philosophical perspective on astrology, philosophical perspective as it relates to your astrology practice, as well as like teachers that have influenced you, maybe kinds of astrology or schools of thought that have influenced you.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Claire Moon. I am a consulting astrologer, and yeah, as far as just influences, I'll start there. because that's where we
Cool.
all start, is by being influenced by somebody. And those people, I mean, I started with the astrology podcast. So, kind of classic, 30
Me too.
something
Yeah.
person, right? Yeah, like it's our gateway. And so those three people, Chris Brennan, Kelly Surtees, Austin Kopic, I've taken the brunt of my coursework from those three folks. And then Demetria George, Robert Hand, I got into a lot of their old lecture material, new lecture material, books, all of those things. And yeah, those are definitely, I mean, it takes a village. So that's like my little village. And then Adam Summer was actually my first, like as a client, he was my first astrologer. So he was also kind of influential on me. And then he introduced me to mindfulness.
Oh,
And
cool.
so that was a huge deal, which I didn't realize would end up affecting my practice. And so those teachers that I learned mindfulness from mostly are Joseph Goldstein, Ajahn Chah, and Thich Nhat Hanh. So their teachings are kind of the foundation that I have now. I mean, I feel like this is a thing with all people who do like astrology or any of these practices that have really historical lineages. It's just like, oh, I just signed up for the rest of my life to just keep working my way back. And yeah, now I have two of those that I have to do that with. That I shouldn't say have to, that I want to do that with, and I'm working on it. But yeah, that's the group. Definitely, big shout out to Chris Brennan for being so encouraging. I think he encourages a lot of us to get on board and to not be scared of doing this stuff professionally. And when I quit pharmacy, he was the only person who was like, oh, hey, you don't actually have to go back to pharmacy if you don't want to. And I was like, oh, wow, that actually really helps to hear. So, yeah, that's definitely influenced Chonk. And then, I mean, as far as my own, like, you want to know kind of practice style.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like definitely modern Hellenistic synthesis, squishing together the ancient and the modern things. I use outer planets, I use Chiron. I don't necessarily bring asteroids into my client practice because I'm just not there yet, or, too many spices in a soup.
Yeah, I
But
hear that.
yeah, but I use them in my own life. Like I'm definitely using asteroids for my own practice for myself. In my 7th year of studying, of, 7 of N, 7 of N for the rest of my life of studying, and in my 3rd year of providing consults for people.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then philosophy wise, like I mean, I have a Capricorn sun, so I can be, as much as I have the Pisces moon, I can be a little utilitarian. And so I definitely look at astrology. I mean, jury's still out for me on it being, for me personally, being a spiritual practice. It probably is. Maybe it is. I'm not sure yet. But it's definitely a tool. I consider astrology a set of techniques that I was blessed to fall upon. And I use those. It's just another kind of set of concepts, like any other system of thought are a bunch of concepts. And I can use those to help people create meaning, understand the time of now, past, future, empowerment, diagnosing challenges, strategizing around them. It's all like the primary function for me is just using astrology as a way to improve people's quality of life, and that can take endless forms, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my main use of it. Does that kind of answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that mindfulness has become more of a pillar of your spiritual practice, and astrology is more kind of like practical considerations for navigating life?
Oh God, I feel like mindfulness actually also meets that second description
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Because it's like,
It's that helpful.
where does spirituality and your life end? It's
Yeah.
like,
I mean, in perfect Pisces fashion, I'm already feeling really nebulous about like these questions. But that's the point, I think, is it's all very complicated and it takes time to feel into. But like, yeah, it's like short answer, yes, it's a pillar. It's a huge pillar. I have found myself kind of using these concepts of that mindfulness practice gives me, which I'll talk about a little bit more maybe. And I find myself transmitting them to my clients, but just using different language. So I'm not going to talk to someone about emptiness. I'm going to talk to someone about coming to a place of stillness so they can receive or think better,
Yeah.
in kind of layman's terms. But
use language that they would understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's definitely kind of weaseling its way in there all the time.
Yeah. And then
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm really curious about this note you made of partial determinism. And I partially say that because I've been listening to an old astrology podcast episode over the past day or two. And I also want to say, like, shout out to Chris. It's so heartwarming to hear him be supportive of you, because I feel like he's like followed me on Twitter and like some of my tweets and stuff. And it just feels, it's like a little thing, but it feels encouraging, like to have people who I look up to and respect just like show a little bit of engagement. I feel like is meaningful. But I was listening to an episode about astrology and magic with him in Austin, where Chris is taking this kind of stoic determinist position about life, really, and about astrology, and saying that things are kind of rooted in the birth chart, and like kind of almost to an extreme of a lot of things that happen to people are evident in their birth chart. And Austin's taking more of this perspective of like, well, people kind of do magic because they are interfacing with the agency that they have in relation to fate and in relation to the conditions that they're faced with. And so I was particularly interested in this note of partial determinism, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Oh yeah, I love this question. I love the discussion of, mechanism, omens versus causes, fate versus free will, all of these things. And yeah, I fall in the partial determinist category. So I believe that there is fate, but also some free will built in there. How much? I don't know. Still trying to figure that out and get a feel for that. But I think it comes down to maybe in more of a flippant way. I'm like, you know what? Life honestly for me just feels better if I believe I have some kind of free will. It just feels better if I think about it that way.
Yeah.
But of course, learning something like zodiacal releasing and seeing just the very strong fadiness of that is a little spooky. And so I can't deny that there's some level of fate involved. But, again, that pillar of mindfulness of like, there's only ever in that, like my practice is vipassana. So I guess one little caveat, one little sidebar for the listeners out there, I am like 100% a Western bodied white lady who is coming at these Eastern philosophies from this place of learning. And I'm a student and I am reverent but ignorant. So I'm doing my best. I've been working on vipassana practice since 2019. So I'm still relatively new to it.
Cool.
But even there, it's like, they say in any moment there's only, and they as in like Joseph Goldstein, and he probably got it from his teacher, there's only ever 6 things happening, whatever senses you have, taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing, and your thoughts, your feelings, your mind forms. And then we can choose how to respond to those. And so with that, if I am experiencing stuff in this corporal form of my body, and then I take a moment, I can choose how to respond to stuff. And that to me feels like free will. I can't prove it, but yeah, that definitely informs that partial determinism as well. Cause yeah, I've thought a lot. I mean, I'm thinking about that a lot, actually, cause I think when you're talking to clients, I mean, I hope these things are coming up in people's minds, but yeah, certainly.
Yeah. And I feel like I relate to the utilitarianism of the Capricorn sun, because I think our birthdays are a day apart. And then
that's right. You have a stellium, don't you?
Yeah. I have a Cap stellium. Yeah, I don't know if I feel like we both have like a large Capricorn house in our chart. I'm not sure who has more. It doesn't matter. But I studied philosophy in college. I also have a Jupiter ruled moon. And so I feel like truth is important. Maybe the sun or I'm sorry, maybe the fire moon, the fire Jupiter moon is a little bit different than the water Jupiter moon. I'm like excited to kind of actually explore that a little bit.
Me too.
Yeah, but I relate to this idea of like utilitarianism, but also like I was thinking about it recently. I studied philosophy and I'm really interested in kind of like systematic thinking, having systems of thought that kind of everything can fit together. And I feel like that's how my Capricorn sun kind of jumps out. But I like that you brought up this idea of pragmatism, which is basically like it helps me to believe this thing to be true. And ultimately, I can never prove. I think that that's the challenging thing about the fate or free will question is that if you take a stance where you're saying everything is fated, there's no way that you can prove that that's not true, because if you have a sense of agency and you act on that, was that fated? Or like was your, and it's like you get into a place in your brain where you're just kind of like, we're not meant to, we've hit the limit of rational thinking. We can't quite go beyond this place.
Right. Yeah, it breaks my brain too. And yeah, I have the same exact kind of rolling of thought of just like, yeah, but what if I, like who's got a hand in this here? But yeah, I have a lot of those similar thoughts. And I also came from a place of dogmatism before astrology. Like I think a few people now know my story, but maybe other people don't.
I don't, so I would love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you. It's pretty short, I guess, but I was a practicing pharmacist for 9 years before I came to astrology. I was a late bloomer, as usual, as per my Saturnian chart. And I got my doctorate in like 2013. I was very dogmatically atheist, scientist, the whole nine. Definitely posted rude memes about Ophiuchus being the 13th sign. Don't look at my Facebook from that. But yeah, I don't know. I somehow suspended my disbelief and I got out of that dogmatic space. And I am very reticent to go back into that in any kind of way, shape, or form. I am much happier in the comfortable embrace of agnosticism. So I definitely fall in there now. But yeah,
yeah,
been there, done that.
Yeah, I was really interested actually in talking to you about that, because I did know that you were a pharmacist and you transitioned away from pharmacy to doing astrology full time. And I think that, to kind of talk about support on Twitter, I think that the way that we met each other is, if I remember correctly, I was posting about statistics and how like no one really understands how statistics works.
Oh,
That's my experience. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. We know each other from Twitter, and I feel like you've kind of like engaged with my tweets, and we've had like interesting conversations and stuff like that. And I've always appreciated your perspective. But I went to grad school last year for urban planning, and I ended up doing a year, and then I got kind of burnt out and disillusioned with it, and I stopped. But a lot of that was doing work into like learning about statistics and how that relates to social science. And I would say, one of the people at the top of my class, and I didn't really understand how statistics worked. I understood how I could get statistics to do what I was told I should get it to do, but I don't know actually how it works, or like why p-values matter. I just know what the p-value should be. And it was, so yeah, it was really interesting, because people, I think, will put their faith in different things like statistics and science. And I'm not speaking against science in any way, but I do think that it's a complicated thing, because I have a respect for science, but I also have seen from a philosophical perspective how it's become a kind of new religion, like in this time of secularism that we're in. And I find that a bit troubling. And so I was curious to hear about like how you ended up in pharmacy, or working as a pharmacist and having the scientist perspective, to working as a professional astrologer and having a different perspective.
Yeah, I love that question, because I don't know, I think it's relevant to a lot of people. And to your point, just to touch on what you were just touching on, like, agreed, stats. I was not at the top of my class with stats. But it is so deeply complicated, and you need like flowcharts on flowcharts just to figure out, for anyone out there, like, it takes a few flowcharts just to figure out which statistical tests are the appropriate ones. Then to have a study that makes sense. It's all very, very difficult, and there's plenty of room for, I mean, we've even seen that when people try to put the scientific method onto astrology, and then the methods are just very poor. It's no small feat to do that method. And yeah, I think anyone being dogmatic, it just basically closes a door. You lose that openness that is what is needed for critical thought. So of course it's not going to be a good thing to get real dogmatic on any account about anything. So yes, agreed, big agree. And then as far as, that transition that I did make, I think the biggest thing that changed for me wasn't so much to do with like, oh, I don't believe in astrology and now I do because I see it working. That came later, but it was more my value system shifted, where I had a certain set of values that were very evidence-based in nature, and I was very skeptical, needed to see it to believe it. Ironically, for a Pisces moon, not a lot of faith running over yonder. And I ended up realizing that things that fell outside of the scientific method held value. And that meaning held value.
Yes.
And that didn't make me a weak person. I feel so bad. I was so gruff. I was just like, oh, people who need meaning are weak. I don't know, it's like, who hurt you? But eventually I did realize that, yeah, there's plenty outside of science land that holds so much value. And as soon as I started letting myself open up to that and let that in, I became a way happier person. I didn't lose my critical thought. I think a lot of the things that I had assumed would be lost if I changed my mind about stuff. So yeah, I think that was the biggest thing that led me there. And then, the rest was more logistics.
Yeah. Do you think that, like, to kind of move on to talk about like the moon and your childhood, do you think that you got like an encouragement to wonder in your childhood, or did you get do you feel like you inherited like skepticism in the household that you grew up in? I'd love to hear more about like what was your relationship to the moon when you were a kid? Like, do you have any memories of that time? Did your parents encourage you to develop relationships with these kinds of things, or?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. I mean, I don't think they intentionally tried to condition me with any certain type of thought, but my dad was always very, very skeptical. And he's super smart guy, very curious and inquisitive. He's a Gemini rising.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So yeah, with Mercury in there and a bunch of other stuff. Gemini stellium.
Like my mom. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Always asking questions. And the criteria is just never good enough. So I think that was like, just seeing him be this very curious person, had the National Geographic subscription that I hold very dear, and getting that kind of perspective. But no, I don't think they tried to make me into a skeptic or a non-skeptic or anything like that. They did like very much appreciate nature. And so we always had like the family set of binoculars, and, we'd look at the moon through the binoculars.
Nice.
And my dad at least knew, that the brightest stars were planets. So he would point out, like, oh, that's Jupiter. But it was never like woo woo or anything like that. But those were some of my first memories with the moon for sure. And they were mostly just like naturalistic like that.
Cool. That's awesome. I think that's like, as many people I think have shared on the podcast, a lot of the advice for relating to the moon has been like, go outside. Like a lot of it is very just embodied and naturalistic and just like being under
Mm-hmm.
the moonlight, you know?
Yeah, it's the closest. I mean, they are the closest thing to us. It just
Right.
makes sense, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you said that you've like come to create some additional memories with the moon as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually funny. I was listening to the EY Washington episode, which was so
Oh,
good.
I love
Oh my
EY.
God. Yeah, and there was like a statement they said about like the moon knows my secrets or
Mm.
something. And I was like, yeah, the few memories I have created, like I'm pretty sure they were just like me being unhinged under the moon. And so I'm like, yeah, it's between me and the moon.
We can keep it that way. That's okay. I'm like pulling up your chart right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
for an Aquarius rising, it feels fitting to like have that little bit of privacy.
Yeah. I
That's
don't know.
quite all
I
right.
more blame my Mars and Scorpio on the 10th. They're like, who are we telling what now? For what reason?
That feels very, very apt too. My Mars in Sagittarius does not understand.
That's much more wild and free.
It's just like we said, I'm actually like, I think pretty, I'm not like someone who just says anything to anybody, but sometimes I'm pretty effusive with the way that I communicate about myself. So
It's a great word.
yeah. So this whole project has been about the centrality of the moon in astrology. And so I'm just curious to hear your take on why you think the moon is important to talk about in astrology.
Yes. I mean, like I was kind of just mentioning before, moon is the closest thing to us. It is the
Mm-hmm.
easiest to, I think, gain or work on a relationship with. Um, but in terms of like our incarnate experience of just the moon being our body, the moon being our senses,
Mm.
and that is our closest experience just to being a human. Um, so with that, you know, as soon as you got a body and you've got senses, you're perceiving things, you're thinking things, you're feeling things, and that whole process is basically the moon.
Mm.
And you know, I also really love this notion of thinking about the moon and just how changeable it is and how humane that is. I
Mm.
don't think we're meant to, and everyone is going to fall differently on this spectrum, but I don't think we're meant to show up being the same every day.
Mm.
I think in like maybe this capitalist hellscape, we are very much encouraged to show up, you know, do this, be the same every day, do the same amount of work, have the same amount of effort inside of you. And if we just watch the moon, it's like the moon's not even doing that. Like, why should I have to be
Mm.
doing that? So I really, I think it's important to take that away from it. Is just that it's normal to have like cyclic changes like that. Um, but yeah, as far as the importance, I was also thinking about too how I just use it as like a clock. Like
Mm.
I'm basically like I've been watching it long enough now, and this is another thing I wish I could tell, you know, 15 years ago, atheist me, hey, did you know in a decade you're going to be like tracking your period with the moon? And I would be like mortified. But yes, that is exactly what I do because it's a fantastic clock. And I also I was pondering on that in preparation for this interview. And what I realized, I was like, it's really beautiful that I am doing something, you know, using the moon as a clock that people have done since the beginning of humans,
Mm.
right? Like
Yeah.
it just makes me feel really, I don't even have words for it. It just makes me feel really in tune with what it is to be human
Mm.
in having that relationship. So that's why I think it's super important. I think
That's
that's all.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super beautiful. I love that. Like the moon was our timekeeper probably before the sun. I was talking about this on a past episode of watching Austin Coppock's Astromagia conference lecture where he was talking about the moon and magic and basically like, you know, we can keep track of the time by watching the moon, and it's like and we can see a cycle in 28 days, but the sun is so much harder to track in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like when is a solar revolution. It's a lot harder to tell beyond just like, oh yeah, the moon was full then and it's full again, and
Mm-hmm.
this is what's happening. Everybody is acting wild.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder what that's about,
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I just had a thought of too while you were thinking that, or where you're saying that is, the sun ruling Leo, which is a fixed sign, and
Mm,
moon ruling Cancer, which is cardinal and has this, it's that energy to begin and begin and begin and begin. And
right.
that really speaks to what you were saying about just like the sun is always, well, not always, but there are less vivid changes.
Mm,
Yeah, it's really interesting. Another thing too, I was thinking about with just the importance of the moon, and you'll have to help me out on this. Was it the Hermeticists who were basically saying that the moon like grabbed all the effluences of the other planets out of the sky and then brought them down to us? Who was in
yeah,
charge of that?
I forget who said that.
I don't
Feel
know.
like the Hermeticists may have said that, but I know that in Austin's talk that I just referenced, he talks about Dorotheus talking about that. So
Okay.
I think early astrologers talked about that as well in relation to
Somebody.
electional.
Okay. Well, that too, just that alone, depending on how you believe all this stuff works, or maybe it doesn't even matter, because even just in technique like of horary or looking at the translation of light, how the moon is like really key in helping other planets make connections with each other when they can't.
Mm, yes.
Or like the void of course moon, kind of a similar principle of if it doesn't have these connections, then what does that feel like? And how important is that? So the moon just having these really, I don't know, specific roles to it that other planets don't have. So yeah, very, very important to be talking about the moon when, maybe some people might think that we're talking about the moon too much. I think in pop
Mm,
astrology, not that anyone thinks, I don't know who would think that, but I mean, pop astrology focuses on it a lot, just with new moon rituals, full moon rituals,
yeah,
but there is actually just a ton to talk about. This
right.
is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reminded of one thing. I've been meaning to read like some Hermetic texts, and
Mhm.
for the other Pisces episode, I'm talking to Cameron, who I know is like
Oh,
pretty
cool.
into that, and so I'm gonna have to pick his brain on that a little bit.
Yeah,
But I
save
was,
it for him. He'll be the scholar about
I'll be
it.
like, Claire brought something up. Can you fill us in?
Yes, help.
But I was reminded of in I studied horary with Chris and Rob Bailey, and in any horary text that you read, whether it's like the medieval Renaissance, Bonatti and Lilly, or what that class focused on, which was Saul, so like medieval Islamicate,
Mhm.
there are like 10 or 15 ways that planets can be talking about the conditions of planets, but then they focus like 10 ways. I think Benatti says there's 17 ways that the moon, looking at the condition of the moon and how the moon can be mistreated. And so it's like, I think that just really speaks to the importance of like how key the moon can be in talking about different kinds of astrology, whether it's
Mhm.
natal, but like more particularly horary and electional. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Um,
yeah, I mean, I feel like you're totally right on with where it's like there is a lot to talk about.
yeah, just, same thing with elections when I'm trying to elect anything. It's like I have to run through this gamut of, things causing poor condition to the moon. And if you can just get past that, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of void, of course, do you use which definition do you use? I'm really interested in like surveying guests with this because some people are using like the modern definition, some people are using what I think that both the definitions we have today are technically medieval. Like one is by Abu Mashar and one's by Saul, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'm just curious. Or do you stick to the old school kind of Hellenistic void, of
I
course,
stick to
definition?
the old school one for sure.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like I'm probably like not the strongest link in this survey. It is not something I pay a ton of attention to unless I'm working on elections.
Mm,
Then I'll look at it kind of sloppily in terms of the medieval definitions,
yeah.
but I am much more going along the Hellenistic definition. I really do like to see um, the moon making some kind of contact within her daily motion
Yeah.
of 13 degrees on either side orb, just, I mean, and that's just my own philosophy that, kind of picked up from teachers, but that it's like when the moon is in some kind of aspect with another planet, it feels like it gives us something to hold on to. Like if I'm trying to, maybe this is a weird metaphor, but it's what comes to mind, is like if I'm trying to hold like a slippery boulder, it's a lot easier to hold that boulder, or maybe we can consider that like energy or something, if there's some handholds. And I feel like if the moon is running in the void, it doesn't have any of that. There's just nothing to hold on to. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. So I like her to have some connection with somebody, clearly not, a malefic if we can avoid it. But one of my goals is, at least in elections, is to get the moon applying to some benefic planet. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not looking at void, of course, too much. Although I will say, like, I do watch the Hellenistic ones, and when those happen, like I feel like I can tell it's really hard for me to be focused. It's really hard for me to feel motivated to get anything done. And I usually just focus on doing more moon things, maybe looking inward, being introspective, cooking, nourishing myself. I mean, if I am cooking, it's going to be something really easy because previous statement about being not motivated. But yeah, I just like to chill pretty much. I don't try to do anything too intense when moon is running in the void.
Yeah. That's cool. That's a great I feel like that's great advice for people when those Hellenistic void of course moons hit. It's like maybe it's like nap time now.
Yeah.
Focus on rest.
Well, yeah, or even like coming back to just hanging out with family or friends, or just doing all of these rejuvenative activities that don't have to do with Saturn, productivity, building, like more focusing on moon stuff, which is usually things that fill the cup and rejuvenate versus emptying it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So your moon is in Pisces. What does the sign of Pisces mean to you? What comes to mind?
Yeah. The first thing that usually comes to mind is the changeability. Valens even said it was changeable. The mutability of it, representing the middle of a season, or sorry, not the middle, the transition from one season to the next, that imparts a lot of adaptability, flexibility that all the mutable signs have. Sagittarius, Gemini, Virgo, they all have that flexibility, adaptability. But then adding in the water component, it really to me becomes, I don't know, maybe I'm just spitballing, but it feels like the most mutable, flexible, changeable one to me of all the mutables.
Yeah.
Also in that note of transition, between the seasons, we also get, and for anyone who's into tarot out there, and I'm not a tarot expert at all, I'm kind of baby, but the 8, 9, and 10 cards always have to do with the mutable signs. So that's just one more thing usually Pisces people speak to endings, but I think all the mutable signs have to do with some kind of ending. And we can see that in like the tarot cards that correspond with the decans of mutable signs. So I think about that a lot. The challenges of letting go of stuff, and the fixed signs, we're maintaining things and we don't want to let go. And then we get to the mutable signs and we have to let go of something usually. Right. So yeah, all of that changeability, also the impressionability that comes with that. We can think about water in a bowl or a vessel and it just fills whatever shape it's poured into. If you put something into water, it just conforms around that. And, with that impressionability, boundary setting. So the classic Pisces challenge of boundaries. I have yet to meet at least a Pisces moon out there. And if you disagree, please write in because I have research to do. But I have yet to meet a Pisces moon that has not at least one point in their life in some area had challenges with boundary setting. And maybe part of that is that we have the traditional rulership of Jupiter who loves to say yes to stuff. It's very affirmational. So that is just adding to the recipe. The exaltation of Venus also in the recipe. Now we are like open to others and very inclusive and accepting. And all of this just ends up with a recipe where it's such all these beautiful traits of like, metta, like loving kindness and acceptance and openness, empathy, that ability to be cohesive and connect with other people. But with that kind of beautiful quality also comes a lot of potential for exploitation or, again, just the need to have some boundaries. So that's one of the big things that comes up for me with Pisces, as well as going back to the Jupiterian rulership of the place, wide perspectives. Very similar to Sagittarius moon. I heard you talking about, trying to coalesce like a theory. We want like a unified theory of something where all of these disparate Gemini pieces of data are coming together and meaning something, And I do think that Pisces has that very wide perspective that Sagittarius also has. But then we have the other part of Pisces in that it is this nocturnal, if we're doing the gendered feminine sign, that ends up more internal, ends up more receptive, responsive versus active. And so I think a lot of that wide perspective gets put inward, for great effect, I think sometimes. Mostly optimistic. It's Jupiter. We're, we have faith. I think that's where the faith comes from, is Jupiter's like, yeah, it's going to turn out. Everything's going to be fine. We can let go. So those are all of my front tip of brain Pisces thoughts.
Nice. Yeah, I'm wondering if with the mutability of the water, there's like a desire or an enjoyment in the changeability of emotions. And the image that comes to mind is like a cargo ship on open water. Like I like to think about the different kinds of modalities as different kinds of elements. And I think of Pisces as like open ocean.
Totally.
And there's like this change in the rough waves that you can't really tell how things are moving or how things will move. But if you take a container and you put that water in the container, it kind of becomes like fixed water. And so I wonder if there's this element of like not wanting to kind of be held down emotionally, or not wanting a change of emotions. And then also like, that element of, is there any kind of like not really wanting to share emotions because of the kind of in and down nature of water?
I can see that. Yeah, that would make a ton of sense, to be perfectly honest. And I did want to have a little discussion with you about equanimity and the emotionality of Pisces. I think it does get a reputation for being like this emotionally volatile, like person with no ability to control themselves. And I don't agree with that at all. And I do.
And I
use
was not attempting to say that. Oh no!
No, not at all. No, this is my own PSA that I came in with. I was like, I got to do this PSA.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discourse on Twitter recently about Pisces being like delusional, which I think doesn't really resonate for me in my understanding of Pisces. So
totally. But to your point, like I do love using the metaphor of open ocean. I usually, when I say it, I also wiggle my arms around like this. Everyone can't see, but I'm wiggling my arms around. I'm like, yeah, there's no rules. It's Pisces. And this also is the other side of that coin of, because we're mutable in water and we're the open ocean, that's why we don't have boundaries necessarily. Naturally, it's not a preset. And it's also like, maybe we don't want them, like you were saying, like maybe we don't want to be held back or have these compartmental, like Virgo, it can compartmentalize stuff, and this goes here and that goes there. And with Pisces, it's all just thrown in the pot together. So it would make sense why, structure is not the preset of Pisces. And it's going to be really interesting with Saturn going in there soon on the 7th of March, that Pisces is going to be faced with this energy of structure and form and it might be a little uncomfortable. I'm not sure. But the advice I've been giving people is that because of this, we need to have built-in flexibility. You can't just walk into a Pisces house, like let's say you're someone who has Pisces in the 6th or something, and you're trying to make this really beefed up daily routine. I think the last thing you want to do is make it super rigid, because you're just going to set up that Pisces place for failure. So have built-in flexibility, cyclicness, not the same every day, because it's water, kind of like the moon in Cancer. It's all cyclic. So can we have a structure that isn't linear and rigid? Can we, like an airplane wing, they're designed to move around a little bit, otherwise they just snap off. So how can we make a structure that's not so condemning if we quote unquote miss a day of something? Yeah, that'll be really, really interesting. I digress though. I feel like I forgot what we were talking about.
No, it's totally okay. I mean, I think the thing that's coming to mind for me now is like thinking about the moon domiciled in Cancer and the emotionality that Cancer gets associated with, and the cardinality being kind of like there is a utility, there is a goal for these emotions. And I think about my own moon in Sagittarius, and I'm just kind of like, what is the goal of the fire, of the mutable fire? Like, what are we trying to do here? And I do think that there's something to what you spoke about. I related it to my sun in Capricorn wanting kind of like structured thought, but there is this element of the Sagittarius moon wanting like the that hit of like, I get, like I see it, and like that desire to share that as well when when that kind of knowledge hits and it is seen. So I don't know if anything comes to mind for you with that, where it's like, what is the Pisces moon trying to do? Or what's the goal of all of the emotional change? Or is that just the goal?
I don't know. I don't know if there is one necessarily, but I can really resonate with the Capricorn sun being like, hey, I didn't sanction this. What's going on over there? And we would like some structure, please. But then, mutable moon being like, no, we're just gonna do it our way. But what does come to mind there? I mean, again, it's kind of my vipassana practice coming in of, and when you have a body and you have senses like the moon does, the natural sequelae is having thoughts, emotions, experiences. You're perceiving stuff. That's the function of the moon, is perceiving things. Seeing something, putting a concept on it, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking thoughts about that thing, and I'm feeling feelings about that concept that I'm perceiving. So I don't know if there's like a purpose to it. But in Pisces, I do feel like there is, coming back to that point about, is Pisces just this, easily excitable, overly emotional sign? And in some ways, yes, in some ways, not the way people talk about it. But I would say, being in the open ocean, these peaks and valleys are quite large. If we think about Jupiter being of large things, it's expansive, then not only are we getting these oscillating feelings, we are also getting big oscillations. So I do feel like with Pisces moon in particular, but maybe this could also relate to people with other Pisces or other planets in Pisces, is this idea of equanimity. And I think when people think about equanimity, they think, it's this idea of, we can have equanimity of thought, mind, emotions, but they think, oh, I'm just not going to have feelings. My way of finding balance or being really even keel is by just not feeling stuff. But that's not at all the case. That's a misunderstanding. There's always going to be feelings. It's just, how do we not get hooked by them? How do we not get carried away with the narratives and the rumination or whatever it is? And then if we can manage to be still in the kind of the eye of this storm per se, we're in a much better position to respond skillfully or with kindness or with insert whatever thing you value. So, sure, emotional, but it's not always going to appear that way on the outside of somebody. Marcus Aurelius has a quote, and I don't have all of it in front of me, but he said something like, be the promontory against which the waves break, be this firm structure against which the waves are just crashing against, and don't move, be still. And maybe that's my Capricorn stuff coming in as well. But I do think a lot of people with Pisces moon, one of their challenges is figuring out how to be that promontory against which the waves break. And I think about that a lot. So yeah. Feelings.
I did want to say one thing really quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's my Sag moon, but I do think that this discussion of vipassana and meditation feels really applicable or apropos for this discussion about like changeable emotions. And because my experience of meditation is that it doesn't take away my emotions, but it can definitely like lower the heat a little bit, to put it in like Sag moon vocabulary. Lowers that heat a little bit. It's a little bit more manageable in a good way. And I think that many years ago when I was learning a little bit about vipassana, and it was like at a yoga studio I was going to in Baltimore, they were talking about, there was this idea of like the mind is like the surface of a body of water or something like that, and like ripples on the surface are kind of like thoughts in the mind. And probably not going to do a great job of describing this, but I do think that meditation can potentially lower the volume on those like massive waves we see in the middle of the ocean, with the ships in the storm. Like it can kind of calm that water a little bit, so that maybe the emotions are still felt and like the thoughts are still being thought, but it's not as gripping, as you said. It's not as like hooking into you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great description. I think about the ripples a lot. And that affects other people too, right? Because if we're not affected externally as much, if we're not allowing those oscillations to carry us away, then we're going to make fewer ripples that are then going to go on and affect other people. And yeah, I think that's really important. And what a perfect metaphor for Pisces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose I should too bring up, just with the emotionality discussion, is empathy. Because of course we have the exaltation of Venus here in Pisces. So there is this connecting element and cohesion with others. And even I believe Jupiter's in charge of groups or parties or wine or something.
Well, yeah, joining in the 11th as well.
Yeah. So, I think empathy is definitely an element of it. Everyone is different, and different charts are going to have different admixtures. But if you got a bunch of Pisces planets, I always recommend doing the Virgo thing in complement and being picky about what you expose yourself to, about who you're around, depending on if it's just our emotional kind of exchanges with others, or if we're being a little bit more woo-woo, like the energetics that we pick up on from other people. That is a thing to pay attention to. And that's not anything, I didn't pay attention to any of that until, I don't know, late 20s, because it took me getting into astrology to then also be exposed to all these other ideas. But yeah, that's made a big difference, just paying attention to how my surroundings are affecting me and the people that I'm around, and then making decisions about what I want to expose myself to, basically.
I think that's so important, because I think that while empathy can be a really positive thing, the other side of empathy is that you are exposing yourself potentially without really choosing to energies that can be overwhelming. I'll just speak from my own self. Like if if my energetic boundaries, if they're kind of too open and I'm not being discerning about the energies that I'm taking in, I can take in stuff that's not mine. And then that has an effect.
Yeah. Yeah, a really detrimental one. That's pretty much exactly what happened to me in medicine. Like I am porous. I am squishy, like a Pisces moon is. And I did not realize that for much of my practice. Because I think I started I was a technician in like 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got in there, and I didn't leave until 2021. So it was about 13 years, yeah, that I was in a place. Most of those years, I did not know that I was porous and squishy. And it was definitely part of my burnout because I wasn't aware of how to hold space for myself, and like, I could hold space for other people. That was the blessing and the curse.
Mm-hmm.
But I always think too that that was part of the skill set, just because, if you're talking to a medical professional, usually you can tell how open they are to you. Like, and a lot of medical professionals, they're there, no offense, there's plenty of great ones, but they're there to get the job done. They don't have a lot of time. They're going to check some stuff off on a list. And there's just not a lot of openness. And I noticed that because of my openness and because I was trying to connect with people, people tell you more stuff.
Yeah.
They tell you that they're not taking their medication. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, me too. But seriously, like they would tell me, that they didn't feel well because of a certain thing, or a certain treatment, or just all kinds of stuff they tell you, even stuff that is not even relevant. And that is great if you're trying to catch med errors, if you're trying to catch just anything going wrong with therapies with people. It becomes a great vulnerability, though, when you're dealing with really heavy stuff, a lot of suffering, and then you're exposed to that suffering. And I wish I would have learned a lot sooner about astrology, because when I learned I had a Pisces moon, I mean, first of all, very stereotypically, I cried because I've got this, like, and we'll talk about it in a bit, like, but I have an overcoming square from Saturn, who I think just had a lid on it, for a good chunk of my life. But just accepting that, I was like, oh yeah, I guess. I was very begrudging about it. I didn't want to be sensitive. I had always, like, it was so funny because I used to tell my mom, I was like, I'm not sensitive. It's like so convinced I was not. And ever since embracing this, like, yeah, I might be sensitive.
Yeah.
I might be. It's really helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what you said at the beginning of, like, you said, like, I thought having meaning, or like searching for meaning, was a weakness. And I do feel like if you are in a situation, you're in a situation for 13 years, every day you're having people tell you things that are just overwhelming. It's like, I could see myself getting to a place where I'm just kind of like a bit shut down, because that's the only way to deal with it. If you don't have other tools to navigate around, like energetic hygiene and boundaries and stuff like that, totally makes sense.
Yeah, pretty much nailed it there.
Yeah, is there anything else that you want to say about your experience of your moon in Pisces, or do you want to talk about its placement in your chart?
Oh yeah, actually, there is one other funny thing that I noticed. So this whole thing about impressionability, or just the flexibility and adaptability of Pisces. Like, I'll be sitting at my desk and there will be a book maybe 2 feet away from me, and I will, like, contort my body in the least ergonomically helpful way to go to the book instead of bringing the book to me. And it's like my natural tendency to just, like, adapt to any environment I'm in instead of changing the environment to suit me. And I have to remind myself, like, you can pick up the book and bring it to you. It's so, like, when I realized that, I was like, Pisces Moon, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So that's a good reminder for people with Pisces moons. Like, you can control your environment.
Yes, you can. You can. It just takes some intentionality. Oh, and then the other thing too was, I wanted to mention with Pisces, what I really love about the flexibility and adaptability of it. And this does go back, I think, to that Pisces is not delusion per se. I'm going to blame that one on Neptune. And, Neptune's been in Pisces for a long time, so it's a bit of a conflation. I get it.
Yeah.
But I think that the nice thing about Jupiter being about meaning and knowledge and understanding and creating that wider perspective, the way that we can express that is so much more flexible here. And so then we get symbolic language and I think kind of similar to Sagittarius in that way, and like specifically thinking about maybe a Mercury in Sagittarius or a Mercury in Pisces, we're taking this larger, wider knowledge and we're expressing it in ways that maybe aren't rote or rigid or prescribed. So we get things like poetry, interpretive dance, and even like scientific illustrations. So if you look at a scientific paper, they've got just myriad data points and all kinds of, dry data. And then someone can create a visual image, whether it be a graph or even just like in cell biology, a lot of pictures that say so much, and it always blows my mind. That's one of my favorite things about science sometimes is the visual images that people create to express so much information in a really like creative way. So yeah, I see Pisces in there, which I don't think is a place we would normally be like, oh yeah, there's Pisces in that textbook. And it's like, yeah, it's totally in there.
It's so interesting thinking about like Pisces connection with spirituality. And, I say sometimes like the first time I had a spiritual experience was when I was like 14 years old, looking at a biology textbook, like looking at the cell structure and thinking about the perfection of the cell and the fact that like all of life basically is based on that microscopic thing, organism, what have you, because it's like the mitochondria inside the cell is its own little cell. And I'm not up on biological theory, but like,
no, that's cool.
But yeah, it's like, wow, this is a perfect thing. And it may have taken over 4 billion years of evolution to make it perfect so that our life, we could think about God now. But yeah, I remember like looking at it and being in class and like having like a real kind of like, oh wow, God is watching me moment, which is so weird to like be engaging with science and have that kind of spiritual experience.
Well, maybe that's a good point about the awe that can come from Pisces, which I have. I mean, all of my life, I've had a very easy awe experience. Like I can see the most simple shit and just be like, wow, like you can show me a ladybug on a leaf and I'm just like, oh my God, like, wow.
That's beautiful.
So I think that definitely comes from Pisces. And to your point about the cell as well, like it just, that made me think about the first decan of Pisces, where we've got Saturn as the ruler from descending Chaldean order, and how that speaks to that. Like Austin Coppock talked about like the underlying invisible structures of things, and in that case, a structure in biology that really it's shared by so much of life. We're all connected, right? So yeah, I think that's really fun. Is there anything else? I feel like there was one other. Nope. I think that's all I had to say about Pisces.
Did you want to talk about dance a little bit and artistry?
Oh,
Is that a different part?
Yeah, like no, that's actually there was something there that I wanted to mention. Just I thought it was funny. I had a realization that one of my favorite things to study in dance is transitions. Like from one shape to the next. Like I'm going to make this shape and then I'm going to make that shape. But what happens in between? Because that's just as important. And it is what binds the whole musical piece together, or the whole choreography piece together. If you're just going out there and, doing these random shapes, that doesn't speak anything. It has to be, held together and made cohesive by transitions. And I don't know, maybe this is 10 of tarot cardsy, but it's also one of the most difficult things in dance that I know of is transitions. No one likes to do them because they're difficult to do in a way that is smooth and controlled. So I thought that was cute. And I was like, oh yeah, of course I would like that.
Yeah, I feel like that makes so much sense with like thinking about the moon as embodiment and thinking about like mutability as movement in two directions at the same time. And I feel like it's such a great example of thinking about modality in astrology. And like you start a movement and then you hold the movement and then you have to do something difficult, which is like what sounds impossible of moving in two directions at the same time.
Yeah.
Mutability. It's like, yeah, mutability is hard.
Totally. It is in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
like there's a pro con list for all of them, but yeah,
Hmm.
transitions are difficult. Letting go is difficult, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Holding on to the thing that was happening and bringing in something new that might not mix together
Mm-hmm.
in a way, and making those things try to work together with each
It
other.
takes creativity. It takes a ton of creativity to
Mm,
do it well, I think. And mutable signs have creativity usually, from what I can see.
yeah. And I think maybe with, what you're saying about dance and the moon in Pisces, it takes a lot of practice too. It takes a
Yeah.
lot of like embodying in this way over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, waves don't like to hold their shape.
Hmm. All right. Did you want to speak at all to the place of Pisces in your chart and how that impacts your experience of the moon?
Yeah. So my moon is in the second, and there's like some really kind of straightforward things. Like my mom was the main breadwinner, so
Mm,
that makes sense. Moon, mom, money, second house.
right.
Uh, also, and this is something that I don't think astrology is necessarily needed to explain connections with bank account and feelings. I think a lot of
Mm,
us are emotionally tied to our bank account, depending on,
absolutely.
you
We should
know,
really talk about it a lot more, I think.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if you are in conditions of poverty, if you're not in a position of privilege or you're in survival mode, that stuff is going to deeply affect you anyway. But I do my own experience, I guess, that I can speak from is just having my moon there and being like, yeah, uh, my moon is mind. My mind is on my money. And what I noticed recently was I was in kind of dire straits financially. I was like almost thinking about moving in with my parents or having an exit
Mm,
strategy to do that. And I had noticed during that several month period where I was super in financial survival mode, I was not feeling my feelings at all. Like
mm.
I had even gotten under the idea that I was like, "Oh, have I healed from all these past things?" And then I got financially stable and I was like, "Nope." Because it like
Did the
all came back.
floodgates literally open?
Yeah, they totally
Yeah.
did. And again, maybe this is confounded by my Saturn placement having a
Mm,
superior square over my moon, but I noticed that I almost required this foundation of financial stability. And again, I think this is probably a wider thing that people experience, but um, needing that kind of foundation of material assets to allow my feeling self to do its thing.
mm,
Um, so I thought that that was kind of a good example. Um, and then also just using my body for like money, basically, like,
mhm,
teaching dance, entertaining with dance. Had a
mhm.
few paths in life at this point. And all that's like super physical and, making money that way. I've just in the charts of clients, I see plenty of people who are in like labor professions where it's really hard on their body and they do have moon in the second.
Mm,
Um, and then, with, I have, granted for me, sixth house of disease, recovery from disease, ruled by the moon,
mm,
that lord of the sixth house in my second,
right.
and working in healthcare,
Mm,
part of the income coming from those types of caregiving activities,
right.
um, using that skill that I have, which I feel like I'm tooting my own horn, but I will toot it, beep, beep.
No, please do.
A skill of and I something that I have to keep working at for my whole life probably, or I care to, is just making sure that people feel cared about
Mm,
and essentially having that intertwined into my work and income.
yeah.
So that's how I've experienced having moon in the second.
Mm,
I forget, what's your rising sign? What house is your moon in?
Sagittarius. It's in my
Oh,
first.
oh, okay, got it. You're
Yeah.
Sag rising. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moon is right there.
Yeah. 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 She's Moon and Mars are cadent by degree.
Mm,
Because I have like a late Sag rising and early Moon Mars.
I see.
But yeah, they're both still in the first. I'm interested how much you think of astrology as like a caretaking profession or like
Hmm.
caregiving profession.
Oh yeah, totally. I do. Even if it's in more subtle ways,
Yeah.
I think that just having people feel seen and heard, or just having that experience of being seen or heard. And astrology is such a facilitator of that. Absolutely caregiving in a way.
Yeah.
I think it improves health and wellness. I don't have the statistics to back that up, but it certainly feels like that's what it's doing. I still feel like that is a thread that has run through a lot of my work, you know. I do feel like it is a caregiving activity.
Yeah. That's interesting. I just am reminded of the fact that not all astrologers look at it that way. I think I'm very much oriented towards a similar kind of approach when I do consultations. You know, I've only done a few, but I know some people can be very like, this is the delineation and this is what it means, and like that's that.
And some clients even, that's all they're looking for. They're not looking to feel,
that's true,
you know, taken care of. But I think a lot of people are, and even if, you know, it's not explicitly stated or explicitly realized, I don't think it's ever a wrong move to try to facilitate someone feeling listened to. And I think that directly translates, just my opinion, that directly translates to feeling cared for. If people are really listening to you, I think you're generally going to feel cared about. And that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, astrology can touch on some really sensitive stuff. So I think.
I mean, yeah. And as soon as we get into heavier topics, like that's when it becomes truly mandatory in my mind. If you're not able, now my Saturn, daddy's home. If you're not able to do that, maybe you should be rethinking what you're doing.
And also, like, Saturn is like, you needed trust like 3 sessions ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you needed to lay a foundation of trust so that you can have the kind of conversations. Some conversations are not possible without trust.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So yeah, let's talk about the relationship of your moon and your sun, and the role that solar phase plays in your experience of the moon. And I think I'd like to also just bring in any placements or any kind of aspects in your chart that you feel like are important to talk about in relation to the moon.
So yeah, the relationship of my moon and my sun, I have a first quarter moon. I mean, the major things I notice about it is just some restlessness. Like, it's that waxing moment where it's clear that you're working on something, you're here to do something, but you don't know how it's going to turn out yet. Yeah. So I do feel this motivation to do, but it is a bit restless.
Ptolemy called that, or maybe it was Porphyry, the other P astrologer, called that like spring, relating that to the season of spring and kind of the sprouting up through those first sprouts through the dirt.
Yeah, it's like the energy to begin, basically. And it can be a bit restless, but also exciting. Like, it feels exciting as well. Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, just as far as, what was it, Jupiter's placement, because Jupiter rules Pisces. So looking at that in my chart, that's in Aries in the 3rd. It's an aversion to the moon.
Happy Jupiter return to you.
Thank you. Yes. What have I learned the last 12 years? Oh my God, I don't know. Lots of stuff, but yeah.
What have you embodied the last 12 years? Like, what have you learned through that Jupiter, and then what have you been able to embody?
I think the biggest thing, I mean, definitely teaching. I always had students in pharmacy, like I was a clinical instructor. So I always had students one-on-one in the pharmacy, teaching them how to pharmacist, like on site, teaching dance, which, I mean, once I came around to my Jupiter return now, I do feel like, yeah, I've spent the better part of a decade in these teaching roles, and it's time for me to kind of take up that mantle and be really serious about it. And also, it's in my 3rd house. So just thinking about, you know, my regular communications, my communication style, my teaching style, you know, what is that? And how do I wield that in a skillful way versus unskillful, which I have done both.
Right.
You know, Jupiter and Aries, it's quick. It is spicy. The Twitter drafts that I have, they do not reach the main timeline, but they are spicy.
So that Jupiter has matured quite a bit is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, I think so. I've learned to slow down. I have to intentionally slow down quite a bit when teaching, when speaking. It's fast. Definitely coach teacher vibes. Like I'm just so excited so easily. I get so enthusiastic. I'm very quick to affirm people, very much the rah-rah, you can do it kind of person. And just like, part of my jobs have always been learning new things and then regurgitating what I've learned. So I think the one big drawback is that because it's an aversion to my moon, sometimes what I'll do is I'll get really excited about something. I will be too quick to say yes. And I won't check in with moon about, oh, hey, we're actually tired or overextended or, we got this other stuff going on. So that's something I've had to learn too in that waiting and pausing of checking in with moon, because that's not going to happen naturally.
Yeah. Do you feel like the contra-intuition relationship plays in at all between Jupiter in Aries and the moon in Pisces?
I never think about it. I just started using that. Please enlighten me.
I don't really. I was hoping you'd enlighten me because
I'm
no expert by any means, but I like contra-intuition a lot because my Jupiter is exactly contra-intuition my ascendant and otherwise doesn't aspect my ascendant. But I will give a shout out to Kira Taborn's astrology podcast or astrology show. She had a great episode with an astrologer. I believe her name is Katie Petty, and as well as Chris. And they talked about Antisha and Contra Antisha, and Katie has like great resources on her website about it. But kind of the Contra Antisha relationship is I think I learned actually yesterday. I was reading Demetra's Volume 2, and there are signs with ascensional times that are grouped together. So Cancer and Sagittarius are grouped together as having similar ascensional times or the same ascensional times, and therefore they have what's called kind of like, I forget if it's equal power or what the term is, but it's basically kind of like a reluctant conjunction, like kind of conjunction.
There's like an added sympathy because they share something in common, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope so. That would be great because the aversion would need some help. There's some other, ways, other, we can take a few steps to get them connected in the chart, but I do notice a little bit of a disconnection. And I think, other things, aspects about my moon that maybe I kind of wondered, I was like, maybe am I not the best, like purest Pisces moon to have for this episode? Because there's a lot of things that have augmented it. Like it's in a malefic enclosure. So it is separating from Mars within 3 degrees, which Mars is hitting it with a trine. So could be worse. But I am a day chart, so not great, but it's moving towards Saturn. And so, the first thing I saw was like, oh, it's an improvement, like throughout the course of my life. Like if we're using that technique from Paulus, where we're looking at the moon's last and next aspect, then, I mean, okay, it's somewhat of an improvement, but overall, it does feel like getting drugged behind a horse, basically. I feel like I'm getting drugged through the mud most of the time between those two. It has required me to, as much as I've had this sensitive little moon, I haven't really had the privilege or what's the good word? I haven't had the environment that would be really nice to have for a sensitive moon. So, which probably, I think at the same time, having that overcoming square from Saturn has absolutely kept things on the rails.
Yeah.
Totally has helped. I can't imagine what I would be. I feel like I am a bowling ball that is being thrown poorly down the bowling lane, but the bumpers are up on each side, and those bumpers are Saturn. That's how I feel about it. So I'm kind of thankful that I have that overcoming square.
Yeah.
And then
I kind of like, especially as my life has gone on, as I've gotten older, I feel like my relationship with Saturn has become so much more constructive, and so I really appreciate like nuanced takes on Saturn and how Saturn can be helpful.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely can be helpful. I mean, it has its drawbacks. I feel like I'm a dam, basically. There's like a wall and a bunch of water behind it sometimes. So I have to be really diligent about, keeping up with my feels. But
Yeah.
overall, I enjoy having
You're
Saturn there.
you're a dam, and you have a Aquarius rising
Oh, I
that
didn't even think about
feels
that.
so the water bear, like holding the water, that feels so fitting.
It's a very large reservoir. There's a lot of water happening. It's a
Mhm.
very strong dam, but it works.
Yeah.
And I'm also thankful for that Saturn square because it intervenes between my moon having a direct conjunction with Rahu, because that's within 3 degrees as well.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that has kind of confused. I think that is a major reason why, Rahu or the North Node bringing in confusion, distortion, frenziedness,
Hmm.
increase, in this myth of the dragon. Yeah, I feel that. Like, there's the question about myth and the moon. That's one of them that really speaks to me. And that's more of a lunar node, not to do exactly with the moon. Um, but it has confused my ability to understand Pisces, at least earlier in my life. I feel like I was very
Mm.
late to get to understand what it is to be Pisces or have a moon in Pisces, because I had to work through a lot of that Rahu kind of distortion, or yeah, just straight up confusion.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm curious too how much the Aquarius rising and like the number of planets in Capricorn in the 12th as well, how that like kind of Saturnian nature has affected your. I mean, I know that you have Saturn in Sag, so it's like the moon
Right.
and Saturn kind of share are both in Jupiterian signs, but I wonder if having Saturn rising sign has made it a little bit harder to connect to that Piscean lunar nature as well.
Yes. Short answer, yes. Yeah, sometimes I feel like my Saturn placements in the 12th, and or Saturn ruled placements, Saturn themselves in the 11th, they're all looking down at my moon and Jupiter, and they're just like horrified. They're like, what are they going to do next down there? What are you
Mm,
doing down there? Stop doing that. They're
hmm.
very much more reserved and thoughtful and deliberate. And I'm very thankful for that. But it is a bit of an interesting juxtaposition to have. It keeps me grounded. I get to have my awe, my optimism, my newfound faiths.
Mm,
But yeah, it's an interesting pairing that doesn't always feel congruent, to be honest.
yeah, I feel like I can relate in a way because I we actually have Venus in almost the same exact place
Mm,
in our charts, and like you posted a picture on Twitter the other day of like I think I forget the caption. Remind me please, but it was like just kind of a snowy
oh, yeah.
like field, and it was just like nothingness. Like I love it, and
Yes.
I'm like that first decan is Venus's decan, and like I
Mhm.
think Austin talks about it as like a place of exile. And
Mhm.
it's weird that Venus has this dignity in a place of exile because
Yeah.
she likes to not be. It's almost like exile, and like I imagine it like she's alone in like
Mhm.
Saturn's like other winter house, and
Mhm.
she's just like hanging out and like kind of likes being alone, like going to like having like a vacation away for herself.
Mhm.
But there is this kind of like I saw that picture and I was just like, oh yeah, I love that idea. I feel like my Venus in Aquarius loves that idea of like snowy, cold nothingness.
Yeah.
And it's like that is kind of in opposition though to this idea of what you were saying of like I didn't always have an environment where the sensitivity could be cultivated or was like kind
Just
of
allowed.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree entirely with, I had not even thought about the Venus and Aquarius placement with just appreciating nebulous nothingness. But I have felt a lot like my daily walks out onto this lake. Now it's frozen, so I've been able to walk out onto it,
Oh,
which has
wow.
felt
Cool.
like such an Aquarian thing because you
Yeah.
are leaving these borders and boundaries of Capricorn and you're going beyond that.
Mm.
And it feels so
Onto the
funny to
fixed
me.
water. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it feels so funny. Like, and it would never happen unless it was super duper northern hemisphere cold, right? Like an air sign cold.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it feels like Aquarius remediation, or too maybe a little bit of 12th house remediation, but
Yeah.
or maybe remediation isn't even the right word. Just connecting with those energies of yeah, going out beyond what is the structure and being like, yeah, there's no rules. There's also nothing out here. I have no resources. There's just snow, but the space is mine.
Mm.
And Venus, in that first decan kind of making that choice to leave what is familiar and
Mm.
to strike out and find something maybe more optimal, which
Mm.
a lot of times does leave you under resourced, which is definitely an experience that I've had.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Definitely like a lot to think about for me there with my own Venus placement.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
No, no, I love it. Thank you. Thank
Uh,
you for that.
yeah. Yeah. So looking at myth, like I had already mentioned my own experience in my chart of Rahu, but more tied to Pisces. And I get this from Jason Hawley's work with the zodiac signs, his lecture on Pisces. He talks about the
Mm-hmm.
Typhon. Is that how you
Mm-hmm.
say it? The Typhon?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, this like, ah, I can't describe it. Maybe it's like a big giant creature with a bunch of heads that just decimates and annihilates everything,
Yeah.
basically. Is that,
That's
do you have
kind of how I
another?
think about it too, like the Hydra kind of, like this
Yeah.
many-headed massive beast.
Yeah. And how it comes into play is just this annihilation component. Like Jason Hawley talks about, yeah, everything is one, everything can be connected, but that's the same case as well. If everything's just decimated or annihilated and everything is turned to dust, it's like, yep, we're all
Mm.
together as dust. But
Mm.
something that I've noticed it with Pisces is just when we reach these peaks or valleys of emotion, there can be this just transcendent experience that also can be very destructive in a
Mm.
way of and now I'm forgetting, maybe this is another Austin Copicism of, getting really upset and just wanting to destroy your piece of artwork or
Mm.
throw it all away or something to that extent. And I have experienced that, not so much as an adult, but certainly wanting to throw everything away in a moment of despair.
Mm.
And yeah, I think Pisces can definitely have that energy of the Typhon. So going back to what we were saying, it's like Pisces doesn't have to be emotionally unhinged, but I also think that there are some instances where, yeah, when it is, it really can have that kind of energy of the Typhon.
Mm.
Um, I have seen that.
Yeah. If I may, I feel like I also want to say that on the other side of destruction is creation, or like a new creation,
Mm-hmm.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
the story of that is, forgive me if I'm wrong, because I don't know who the two people are. I think it's Aphrodite and
Eros.
Eros, who's her child.
I think so.
Okay.
When they turn into the fish.
Yeah, so they're fleeing
Yeah.
the Typhon and they jump in the water and they transform into fish. They become something new
Mm-hmm.
through this moment of having to leave behind the past, having to kind of destroy themselves in a way to become, to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there feels something beautiful about that idea of like creating something new to survive, or kind of like the creativity on the other side of necessary destruction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think they come as a pair, this dualism pair. There's
Mm-hmm.
not one without the other.
Mm.
So, and I think Pisces does hold in its wideness, it holds a lot of those dualisms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I'm reminded of the Thema Mundi and Cancer being the ascendant in that,
Mm-hmm.
and Cancer being associated with just the creation of life. But I'm thinking I feel like this Pisces story and the new life that's created in the story is reminding me of like, again, to go back to kind of like life and biology, like the 4 to 6 billion years ago, like the primordial waters on Earth. Again, this kind of idea of like open water, and like without that open water, we don't have the formation of life that has evolved to what it is today.
Yeah, it's like cohesive soup. That's
Yeah.
exactly what Pisces is.
Yes.
It's cohesive soup. Yes,
Amazing.
we are all one, whether it is creative or destructive or both. Yeah, we get there.
Wonderful. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about the moon and like tracking your kind of your physical life. Have you tracked the cycles of the moon in relation to your emotional life? Like I'm interested in particular to like hear about like if there's anything out of the ordinary that might show up. Like I was sharing, like when the moon is in water, it's an emotional time. Like for me, when the moon is in Scorpio, I basically just like feel nothing.
Yeah.
Because I guess because it's my 12th, I'm not really sure. But I was just curious if there's any things you've noticed for yourself with that.
Yeah, totally. I generally do notice the moon phases. So if it's a new moon, don't feel like going to the gym pretty much ever. If it's a full moon, don't sleep as well, tend to be a little restless, find myself like wanting to stay up until 2 a.m. Also, like moon in Pisces in particular, and I have been watching this lately because my initial theory was I was like, well, if it's all artistic and creative, maybe when my moon goes in there, I'll want to dance and I'll make really good dance. But every time I try to do that, I feel like a bag of potatoes and I don't want to move at all. Or if I am dancing when moon is in Pisces, I have to just like go really, really slow and do really low impact kind of movements.
So when you're having,
I'm just tired.
When you're having your kind of new moon phase for your chart, that makes a lot of sense.
A little disappointing. I was like, I want the juice. Like, where's the juice? So that's one of the big ways I've noticed it. But yeah, and then the other fun thing that I've been having recently is Cancer secondary progress moon. And that has been so great. I'm like taking care of myself for the first time in my life in ways I've never been able to.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm like flossing a ton. Like I walked into the dentist a few months ago and I was like, guess what? Guess who's flossing? It's me.
Yes.
So proud of myself. Like so much self-care happening. And it's so different than my Capricorn placements. So yeah, it's been great. And I'm just really thankful that I've gotten like this Cancer crash course in self-care that I will hopefully take with me even after secondary progress moon leaves there. But yeah, that's what I probably noticed the most.
Yeah, that's so cool too, because you said it's your 6th whole sign house, so it would have to do with like, your day-to-day kind of. Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, like you talked a little bit about your spiritual practice, or like maybe I don't want to say lack thereof, because I don't know.
That's cool.
Kind of sorry to say that, but because it's like you talked about vipassana, and that feels like a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
But then I don't know how sometimes when people talk about agnosticism, like whether that can be a kind of spirituality unto itself, because there's like a humility that comes with that of like, I don't know, like an open, and there can be an openness to that. But anyway.
That's exactly what it is though. No, I totally am picking up what you're putting down there. And I think it was definitely Becca Tarnas, and I believe it was epistemological humility or epistemological something like that. And that is entirely where my agnosticism comes from. It's more like a placeholder for a lack of better words, because to be perfectly honest, like I get more woo-woo every year. I have I'm looking right now at my pile of Sphere and Sundry paraphernalia and materia.
Awesome.
Like
Did you put any materia on for this conversation?
Oh my gosh, I'm like
Can we talk about it for a minute?
I'm a little shy and embarrassed because I'm so I'm
can
like,
cut it out if you want
oh,
to.
no, it's
Okay.
cute. Because like I'm really open about my dance. I've always been
Mm,
open with that. But like when it comes to speaking in public, when it's not just, I'm good one-on-one, but
hmm
I use the Regulus.
Nice.
Yeah, because it allegedly gives me confidence. And I don't know, maybe it worked. I feel like I'm doing okay.
I think you're doing great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to have uh some solar one, but I used that all up. So
Mm.
now I'm onto the Regulus. Did you use anything?
I use Jupiter and Sag oil kind of
Nice.
every day.
Yeah.
And then when I'm before doing the podcast, I typically put on Venus and Libra oil
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like my
Oh, I
liver
should have done that.
my midheaven is in Libra. Yeah, it just like helps me, and it's in the 11th, and I don't know, it feels like my midheaven's really tied into the podcast. My Venus is really tied into the podcast, and so I like to do that. If I'm feeling particularly scattered, I'll put on some Mercury and Virgo,
Yeah,
but it's kind of late, and Mercury and Virgo can have this kind of energizing
right.
energy. So I'm like
I
really
treat
kind
that
of
like,
careful
yeah,
with
like
that.
amphetamines. I don't put it on before noon.
Hmm
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely doing all of that stuff. I have been memorizing Orphic hymns for a few years.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm doing a bunch of stuff that definitely would fly in the face of me labeling myself as agnostic.
Hmm
Maybe it's the moon in Pisces. I just kind of don't care. I just kind of, labels. They're so
Yeah.
laborious, necessary. But when it comes to my spiritual stuff, I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that I've been sober since I was 18,
Mm,
and I got sober like in the spiritual circles I run in relating to my sobriety. I guess I'll frame it this way.
hmm
There are people that are agnostic, and it's a very kind of spiritual approach to remaining sober. But people who are agnostic will say like, it doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I do,
mm,
because like action. So it's like seeking is the important thing, not finding, and
right.
taking the action is the thing that will lead to experience of something.
Yeah.
Because like the understanding, the thinking is not as important. And so I really appreciate people, because doubt, I will say for me, like doubt has played a strong role in my spiritual journey.
Sure.
And I think that it's really admirable when people, for whatever reason they have, continue to take action, even if something maybe, they don't believe the thought around it, or
Right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it totally does. And I think it just comes back to what we're valuing and where we see like the impact or the meaning or the purpose of what we're doing. And then that kind of just becomes our code of life. And I
mm,
think part of spirituality is a bit of like what are our values, what is our code of life, and how does that affect how we engage with reality and circumstance. Um,
and there's an element
and
too
yeah.
to what you talked about with, sorry to cut you off,
Oh
but
no, you're fine. That was
with
it. That's all I had.
with the cap sun of like, does it work?
Right. Yep.
It's like what
hmm
actually works, because it's like, okay, if I do this thing and it makes me feel better,
Right.
and it makes me act better towards my partner, and it makes me be a better child, like a better son to my mom, it's like,
Right. Yeah. What's the
okay,
quality of life? You know,
yeah,
isn't that why we're all doing this? Is to just get a better quality of life, whether
yeah,
that is making meaning or feeling more empowered or acting different or whatever it is. And I do think that, spiritual practice can be super complementary to astrology.
hmm
I hear Adam Ellenboss talk about that a lot, how
mm,
it's so important to his practice of astrology. And I do not disagree with that at all. I don't I think you can be a fine astrologer without having a spiritual practice, but it's very complementary.
yeah,
Yeah, they go together like peanut butter and jelly. And I guess like the last thing I'll say just about my own spiritual practice is that and on this note of like, does it work or not? Our
mm,
Capricorn, show me the evidence.
yeah,
I have been doing some chanting work, like remediation work that I was set on a course from Nate Craddock of Soul Friend Astrology. So big shout out to Nate. If you
mm,
need a Vedic appointment, he does Jyotish. It's fantastic. But I started doing a chant for a mantra for Dakshinamurti, who is like the teacher of teachers. And I was told, like, this can help you find the teachers that you need. And within a week, I found an in-person, real-life Vipassana teacher who I now see once a week in a group setting. So I was like, oh, this shit works. So I'm very thankful for that technology.
That's awesome.
So thankful. But yeah, I think that pretty much is my like spiritual practice, is just slathering myself with Sphere and Sundry oils, meditating, some chanting, which I don't know how long I'll continue with that after I'm done with my prescription on that. But I actually I had one little quote I wanted to share, and maybe this would be a place to end it, wrap it up, because I think it does speak about my practice a lot. And this actually it's kind of hard to reconcile with astrology, but it comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there's part of it cut off, but he says essentially, but man postpones or remembers. He does not live in the present, but with reverted eye laments the past, or heedless of the riches that surround him, stands on tiptoe to foresee the future. He cannot be happy and strong until he too lives with nature in the present above time. And I was like, damn, how am I going to keep doing astrology with that?
Wow. Above time.
Above time, yeah.
Above time.
That's the goal, you're not even held down by the concept of a present. But if I had to, wrap all, or put in a nutshell my spiritual leanings, I would say that quote pretty much sums it up.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, Claire, where can we find you? And is there anything that you are working on that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. So the main thing I'm working on right now, besides just doing consultation with folks, is I'm doing some research on the moon under bond, which is a technique from Demetra George's Ancient Astrology, Volume 1. It is in the lunar considerations part, but it's just a couple pages, and I've been using it in my practice for about a year. It's just incredible results. It shows a symbolic narrative that I don't get from any other technique. And I'm looking for research participants. So you can go onto my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. And it is one of my cheapest options or offerings. It's $45 for 45 minutes. The technique, it only takes about 20 minutes to explore. So you get the rest of the time to just have a birth chart reading or look at transits or forecasting or whatever you want. But I'm looking for people in particular who have a new moon or a full moon in their birth chart. Okay. So all the details are online. They can go www.aligninglightastrology.com. I'm on Instagram as Aligning Light Astrology. I'm on YouTube. I have a couple events every month live on YouTube, and then Twitter at Aligning Lights.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes.
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. Claire, thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely talking with you.
Yeah, you too. It was so good to meet you finally.
You as well.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Bye. To support the show by donating or becoming a member, please visit my website, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to contact me via my website or email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to astrologers and resources that we touched on in this episode. Thanks. See you next time.